We stand, we rise, we care, our lives. We stand, we rise, we care, our lives. We stand, we rise, we care, our
pastor in Talkeetna, and then this guy shows up at my door. I never knew him from anybody, but he's got a story, and then the two of us together have an interesting account here. Dan, why don't you come up and share your part here?
So who can follow that? And that was the problem. So click forward there. All right. Look at this guy. This is a 22-year-old guy, his first climb in Alaska. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here, because my life has been sort of a circle of things, and you're going to see that. So I'm going to start off with, and I'm going to say a prayer for my kids, because they're going to hear a lot of stuff they haven't heard before. So, so bear with me. I've lived a life. So. My first memories are my father coming back from Vietnam in 1969. And all the pain of his life and all of the sin in his life was cast on me. And I lived a hell that I can't even begin to talk about. I don't talk about it really, and that's really one of the things I still struggle with. So if you look at this guy back here, that's probably the most unhappy human being in the world. I was living in pain. And the day I got old enough to leave at 16, I walked out of my house, and I didn't want to have anything to do with my father or that suburban life, or he was a colonel in the Army, and I remember being in sixth grade saying, these guys are screwed up. I can't wait to get out of here. So at 16, I bailed. I ended up following some friends to Alabama, of all places. No place for a guy from Virginia to be, that's for sure, from D.C. But I ended up down there, and I met a bunch of people who were climbers. And I started going out with them because climbers have really good pot, and that was judged on what I smelled out here at the park last night, they still do. So I'd go out and I'd party with them, and then one day they said, "You want to climb?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to give it." So I gave it a go, and I was in. I finally found something I connected to. Finally found some place that I understood, some place that felt like home to me, some people who shared sort of this alternative life. And I threw myself in, not 100%, but 150%. And I went from being a 200-pound guy to a 165-pound guy, and I was doing fingertip pull-ups and running, and my life was climbing, and I was a rock climbing madman. And back then, we didn't think we were very good. There weren't a lot of climbers in the Southeast at that time, so we didn't think we were good enough to be late in course. So everything we did was 5'8". We never climbed anything harder than 5'8". I've gone back since, and we're climbing 10s and 11s, but had no idea because we had nothing to gauge it about. So at about 20, in my 20s, I decided I was going to pursue it, and I ended up packing my Jeep and going to Alaska. And I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew that I wasn't going to be who I wanted to be, if that makes any sense, if I didn't really throw into this thing. So I ended up in Alaska. This is my first climb on Byron Peak, and I didn't know what I was going to be. I thought I was going to climb McKinley. And I'd heard stories about the Jim Hales and all that, and I was the next generation, and I wanted to take it to another level. And so I started climbing. And for me, vertical and overhanging was good. So I ended up going to a place called Valdez, Alaska, and when I drove into Valdez, it was like Yosemite of ice climbing. So if you can see this is right off the road, and our joke used to be they're 1,000-foot ice climbs and you get belay out of your car, which isn't too far from the truth, to be honest with you. And I liked it because there was no approach. It's unlike these guys. I could just walk across the low river, and there are 3 grade 5 ice climbs on the left. You can't see it. Is Bridal Veil, Simple Twist of Fate. Glass Onion is that other one that you have to do some mixed climbing to get up to, and Keystone Green Steps. And there's probably 1,000 more ice climbs. And I did all of them. Anything I could do, I climbed. I climbed every ice climb there was to do. took those skills in the Alaska Range and did some stuff and pushed myself harder and harder. And the farther I got to the edge, the more unhappy I was. And I was coming unglued inside because my history, my childhood I couldn't, no matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. No matter what drug I took, no matter how hard I climbed, no matter how extreme I went, no matter what I soloed. By the way, I soloed a bunch of first ascents in here. I soloed a lot of climbs I never even talked to anybody about. Because what's funny is I didn't care if I lived or died. I didn't care. And what's amazing about that is I met a lot of other people who were like that. I met a lot of climbers, and at the very edge of climbing is either genius or death. And so I was culminating and where's this going? So I got this brilliant idea that I was going to do a first ascent on Mount Huntington in winter. So it wasn't good enough to do a first ascent of a climb, which became the Colton Leach route. Nobody climbed up to then. But I wanted to do it in winter because I thought that was extreme. Well, it was. It was a great idea. And I got some good friends of mine, some guys I knew. Charlie Cicero was on them, never climbed before. World famous climber now. He'd been to the Himalayas before. Lots to read about him and lots I'll talk about. And I took another friend of mine, Ernie Borjan, and we were going to go climb a climb that was called Dreams of Brown Moose, Dream of Brown Moose. I think that's what you named it, and we'll get to that. And that was sort of the last climb that I hadn't done. And it doesn't form up very much. It's very dangerous, and I'll get to that. But before that, I went all over the world chasing the hardest climbs. That's me on, I think that's Keystone Green Steps, not too many years after that. And then I decided I was going to chase the hard climbs, and I came to Vail because I heard somebody put up a hard climb called the Fang. So we packed up our stuff, we came down here, we slept in somebody's backyard in Vail, and we ran up this thing, took the second ascent, it fell down the next day. While we're on it, was going boom, and I was like, yeah, baby, this is climbing. And so we got the second ascent of that. That's Bill Weiss leading it. I conned him into climbing that thing. He said, well, we can't climb it, it's about to fall down. I said, we do that all the time in Alaska. I conned him right into it, and so it took him 4 hours, it took me 2 hours to finish it. So anyway, take it back to Alaska. I'm training with the two best climbers I know. We're going to do Hunter and Winter. And it was November. We're driving our way down. It had been a really dry winter. We're driving our way down south of Anchorage, and we're going to go up to Byron Glacier, and then we're going to find our way up a mountain. And on the way down there, it starts to rain. Now, I was younger than these guys. They're much more experienced, and I'm thinking, rain. This isn't good. It's got to be snowing up higher. But I thought, well, these guys know what they're doing. They're not, I'll be fine. Never said anything. We trudge our way up halfway up this mountain, and we turn around and we get to the ice, and man, I was an ice guru. I kind of lifted this picture off the internet because it hasn't been climbed too much. Picture this way up the side of a mountain, lots of snow to get there. We get to the base of this thing, and this is Dream of Brown Moose. And it had only been climbed once before, and so I got on the sharp end of this thing, and I ran up the first 300 feet, no pro, unroped, because I was going to impress these guys. And I got to the big parking lot ledge up there that you can see, and I set up a belay and brought them up, and then Ernie followed the last pitch. We were using 300-foot 9mm ropes back then, by the way, which was talk about climbing with a bungee cord. We did. If you fell, you'd stretch it about 50 feet. It was crazy. So we get to the top of it, and at the top there's this huge snow bowl. I mean, massive snow bowl. Now at this point it's snowing like the dickens. I'm looking at this snow bowl and going, we're in the death zone here. This thing's going to release any minute. We got to get off of this thing. So we took our two 300-foot ropes, and I tied them around some alders up there, used big alders, and I tied them on her. And Charlie looked at me, and he said, are you kidding me? I said, we do it all the time. So he said, but there's not one of them that can, but if you get 40 of them together, they're really going to be good. So we rappelled down to the parking lot. I rappelled first down the parking lot ledge, and I put in an ice axe, and I clipped into it, and then they rappelled down to me. And Ernie started to set up a belay. He banging in a piton, a little rock that was set out there. And I was clipped into my ice axe and sitting there, and I was looking above going, I think we're going to die. This is really bad. We shouldn't be here. And Charlie joined us. We pulled the ropes down, ready to make the next rappel, and I pulled my ice axe out, and I was going to go over and clip into the belay just as I heard what I knew was going to come. A massive avalanche came over. I thought somebody said avalanche. Maybe they did. And I looked up just in time. It knocked me down to the ground, down to this snow ledge. Didn't have an ice axe, and I trying to put my feet into the snow. It was piling up on top of me. It was really wet. And I was trying to get my crampons in, and it's just pounding me down, and the snow released under me. And I fell off the ledge, and I just climbed it, and I knew what I was going to fall over. And I went about 100, 200 feet till I hit the first ledge. And I hit it standing up. I remember it coming, it felt like it was coming up at me. And I hit so hard it broke my back in 4 places. And then I flipped down another 40 or 50 feet, and I broke all the ribs on this side, and I flipped another 40 or 50, broke all the ribs on this side. It felt like a pillow was hitting me. It didn't hurt, but I knew what was happening, and it was just this, well, this is what it's like, I guess. This is what death feels like. And then I was underneath the snow, and I was traveling down the lower end of this ice, and I thought about swimming to the top, but I thought, I'm dead. Doesn't make any difference. I knowed what had just happened to me. One of the ribs had punctured a lung. I had contusions in my heart, broke a hip, broke both shoulders, and I was under the snow. Thought I was going to swim up, but actually I was face down, and it took all the skin off my face. And at the very end, it spit me out, and I was laying there, and I kind of rolled over, and I looked up, and I'd never been unconscious, and I'm trying to kind of gauge where I'm at, what's going on, and I heard yelling, and Ernie and Charlie, they rappelled down to me, and Ernie took one look at me. I was bleeding out of my eyes. I was a mess. I was gurgling, but strangely I wasn't in any pain yet. And so he said, so you get a few minutes. It's really nice, that really momentary feeling of it's not so bad. And I tried to sit up, and that wasn't going to happen. I felt bones sticking out of my back. I thought, this isn't good. And then Ernie said, I'm going for help, and he bolted. And we were a long way from anything. And Charlie Cicero said, dude, I got to move you. And I said, if you move me, I won't walk. You know, the pain started to come on at this point. I realized my back was broken. And he said, we can't stay here. I said, well, leave me. And he said, I won't. So he laid on top of me. And for 4 hours, he looked in my eyes, and avalanches came down and stopped right here, right here. And he'd get up and he'd wait on it, and he never left. And I never in my life had anybody like that. I never knew anybody that brave, that giving, that loving. And I was gurgling. I couldn't breathe. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And he kept saying to me, it's up to you whether you live or die. It's up to you. And the pain would come in waves. It would hit my back, and I'd be in agony. And then it would hit my chest. And, I mean, the pain was unbelievable. And at one moment, I just closed my eyes. And I rushed inside myself at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And then I exploded, if you will, out of myself. And I passed through him, and I passed through the snow and the rock and everything, and I came out right here. And I'm standing looking at him and me. And I didn't have any pain. It didn't hurt. I was warm. I was, wow. And I saw me laying there and him over me, and I said, I heard somebody say, it's perfect. It's perfect. And I felt this feeling like I never experienced before of just peace and calm. I was like, wow, it's just as it's supposed to be. And there wasn't tragedy anymore. It wasn't awful. And things started to fall away from me. All the pain in my life, all the worry, all the pain, all the hate, all of the anger was gone. And I was sitting there in this, oh, it's beautiful. And then I turned my attention into a light. And this light pulled me into it. And the light was around me. Light was going through me. The light was me. And every photon of that light was a feeling of love I've never experienced in my life, ever. I never felt anything like that. I didn't know there was love. See, I'd been blind my whole life, and it was like all of a sudden I woke up, and not only did I wake up, I saw colors I didn't even know. And I was feeling things I didn't even understand. And then I remembered who God was, what the purpose of my life was, an understanding that I couldn't have in my body, that we don't get in these bodies. We only get in the spiritual realm. And I'm taking it all in. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm getting these things, these understandings, these perspectives, this feeling of God that I never even knew. I grew up a Catholic. I went to church 5 times in my life. What did I know? You know? And I'm taking it all in. I'm like, this love, this feeling, oh. And then there was a thought of something I hadn't done. And started to feel a panic, and I opened my eyes. And I'm laying there on the ice, and Ernie's standing over me going, oh, you were dead. I was like, yeah, I know I was dead. He said, no, brother, you were dead. I said, I know I was dead. And then, I heard people coming. And by miracle, Ernie had taken off down the road and seen we're in Alaska, and it was 1980, whatever, early 80s, and there weren't many people out where we were, and he found a construction crew. They had a cell phone. They called Anchorage. Now, the ceiling had come down to maybe 200 feet, and in my mind, I'm thinking there's no way that we can get help. But these guys decided to come up and help me, and they made a makeshift litter, and they're starting to take me down the mountain, and I hear a helicopter land. And these guys had flown right up the Ketrich Arm and right up the valley and landed. And then I thought for a second, well, maybe I might make it. This is crazy. And I got in the helicopter, and they took me to Anchorage, and then all the stuff of going through the emergency room and them piecing me back together. And I spent an extended time in the hospital, as you can imagine, a full 10 days. So I didn't have insurance. I didn't have anything. And that happened November 14th. Thanksgiving, I released myself from the hospital. The doctor said, if you can stay off morphine one day, I'll let you go. So I got off morphine for a day. And he kicked me from the hospital, and I hadn't had any surgeries at all. My back healed on its own. And then I tried to figure out what this whole experience was about. And I was walking in this state of grace I never understood. God was taking me in places I had no idea. I was like, wow, what is this all about? So I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I read the Tao. I read all sorts of New Age stuff. I'm like, what is this God I experienced? Because I didn't understand him. And then somebody handed me the New Testament. And thank God it was just the New Testament. Because if it's anything more than the New Testament, boy, I'd have been running from it. But I kept reading about Jesus, and I was like, and I read the Sermon on the Mount, and that was it. That was the feeling I had when I read the Sermon on the Mount, is what I felt that day. And the Tao is a wonderful book. Tibetan Book of the Dead is a great book, and they talk about God, but Jesus was God, and I knew it. And I found myself in Talkeetna after a lot of weird gigs, and I'm sitting in Talkeetna and trying to sort out my life, living in a cabin off the Talkeetna River in the middle of nowhere. And I'm in town, and I'm telling somebody my story because I had to tell people my story because that was really important. I needed to get it out. And somebody said, there's this character in town you need to meet. He's a pastor in the church. I'm like, pastor in the church. I don't want to deal with a pastor. He said, no, he's a climbing guide. You want to talk to him? He's Jim Hale. I said, no kidding. So I find my way over to Jim Hale's house. I knock on the door, and I'd heard about him. I knew of him. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm nobody to talk to this guy. My story really isn't that important. I've heard the other stories. So I knock on the door. He comes walking out. He's got a family. He's happy. Who's this happy guy? And we start talking, and I start talking about what happened to me on Dream. I met Brown Moose, and he's listening, and he says, I did the first ascent of that. Like, no kidding. Didn't know that. No kidding. There's God again. He's showing up one more time. And he started telling me about his experiences on the mountain and about finding God, and I started to realize there was more to this whole thing, that God was with me, walking with me. He had always been with me. He'd been with me when I was a child suffering the worst of things, and I didn't know it. He's there with me on the mountain. He's there with me today. He's there when I'm in my worst of times. He's here. He's always here. He's now. He's right here. And so I moved to Colorado. I called Jim up, and here we are. And it makes no sense to me. Never felt like an Alaskan. I still don't feel like Alaskan, but I'm with one. So it came together, and I want to tell you, people will come up to me all the time. I want to say, this is very important. I thought about it the last couple of days. Wow, you had this experience with God. Aren't you lucky? And I I talked to Jim about this. Oh, man, no, I'm not. So Thomas, doubting Thomas, Jesus said to him, blessed are ye who don't see but yet believe. Saying in verse to me, how difficult it will be for you who have seen and yet still have doubt. And I have doubt every day, 10 times a day. I wonder about those experiences. I wonder about why me. I don't understand. I'm still a heathen. I'll never live up, and that's the whole point. By grace. By grace I'm saved. By grace I'm here. So, thank you.
Well, so Dan and I experienced something of God that went beyond the religious, and it went beyond the political. And so often, of course, that's what we talk about. And people come to churches and they talk about God, but sometimes they don't meet God. Well, today, just even in worship, I remember meeting God. He's there. And he's there for you in whatever circumstances that you're in. Now, Dan and I had some radical circumstances involving high mountains and waterfalls and avalanches and various other things. Like, you don't have to go do those things to have those experiences. Because life throws things at you all the time that are overwhelming. You deal with finances, you deal with health, you deal with relationships, you deal with hope and some dreams and fears. We've all got them. And we all deal with them every day. And that's what Dan was talking about, is every day we find ourselves, sometimes many times in a day, saying, oh God, what? But he's there. He is a God who's the same yesterday, today, and forever. We were hearing that. He doesn't change. He says, I'll never leave you, and I'll never forsake you. And I'll take everything that you're going through, and I'll make it work out together for your good if you just follow me. And so that's the whole point about what Dan and I, this is the first time we've done this together. And then God just kind of did this, and it's kind of an amazing thing to both of us, that all the ties and connections and common ground that we've had in the Lord. But the one common ground that we found is that there is a God who will meet you in the realm of the impossible. And he's there. It's really him. And what it did for Dan and I is it set us on a course of questioning, because we're kind of a lot of alike in the way that we see things and the way that we think things. And we began to want to know, okay, if this is really God, what do I do with this? What do we do with this experience? I mean, and so what about church, and what about Bible, and what about Jesus, and what about all these different things? And he and I both went on a very common course again, where we started to look at the historical evidences. We started looking at the prophetic evidences. We started looking at the archaeological evidences. And if this Jesus was who he says he was, and if he really was real, then there ought to be evidences that say that that's so, that it's historically true, prophetically true, archaeologically true, And that this experience that we had some context. It had some meaning. It had some foundation that would help us to be able to move forward. And that became everything to me, which is why I'm a pastor now instead of a mountain guide. And that's why we're doing the things that we do. And the point is this: God loves you. He knows what you're going through. He's right there. And the most important thing is that when you go through those situations where you're feeling so alone, is to look around. He's right there. Ask him to show you. Ask him to help you. Because traditionally, we could be in a spot of saying, well, you need to pray this prayer, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. Well, that's not the point. Because if you can get talked into something, Ketrich and I were talking about this yesterday, if you can get talked into something, somebody else can talk you out of it. What you need, personally, is an experience with this same Jesus that we've experienced that's absolutely changed our whole concept of God. The beauties, the wonders, the glory, the love, the warmth, the kindness, the goodness of God. Absolutely overwhelming. And he's there for you too. So God bless you. I want to pray for you real quick here. Father, I just ask in Jesus' name that what's going on here, Lord God, will be nothing but a demonstration of your grace. Father, that it will increase faith. God, that our trust in you will deepen. Father, that our experience with you will ripen and we'll just get closer to you all the time. Lord, thank you for lifting us up into your presence today through worship and through prayer and through testimony. Lord, because this is all you. It's all about you and your grace and your goodness and your power and your glory. Lord, we love you and we thank you. So God, I pray, Lord, that there would be an increase of your government and of your peace in our lives. Father, that we would love you.